Welcome back. Today we are going to discuss village people, and if you stay tuned to the end, somewhere in the middle of the video, I am going to give you a hint to make study easier. Studying is never easy, but there are ways and means in which you can make it easier for yourself. So let's get started. As always, a short summary. The story Village People consists of an introductory essay and 2 short stories. In the introductory essay, the narrator speaks about poverty in rural Botswana because Bessie Head, who is the author of the short story, she lived in Botswana and most of her stories are set there. So the narrator talks about poverty in rural Botswana as well as the effects of poverty on the African continent in which she lives. She thinks that the hard life people face takes away their dignity, which we see in the second story. But she also says that the people in Africa are so used to poverty that they regard it as normal. They do not notice the sign of each other's poverty anymore. And she also says what the African people do is they look into each other's eyes. Appearance is not important to them anymore. Who you are is what counts. So these people don't notice the poverty anymore. And she even starts off the story by saying they wear it like a quiet second skin. In the first story, she also says that babies are dying because of starvation and malnutrition. She also says that people resist change, or they only allow change to occur very slowly. We are going to discuss this one later as well because there was a question about this in a previous exam paper. And she says that these humble people are extremely warm and loving. She believes that the gods and people elsewhere need to be reminded that such places and people exist. It is the most beautiful paragraph where she says, it may be that they overlook desert and semi-desert places. I should like to remind them that there are people here too who need taking care of. In the first story, entitled The Old Woman, the narrator is the same as in the opening essay. If you look at the style of writing, which we're going to discuss later on, you will see that it's the same style employed in both of these stories, and we're also going to compare the last paragraph of each story so that you can see that the style and the subject matter correspond. We meet a very frail old woman who is starving and she collapses from extreme hunger. Now, there are certain commentators who believe that the fact that she wears her shoes on the wrong feet might be symbolic of the fact that the people in Africa are going in the wrong direction. They are focusing on the wrong things instead of trying to improve their lives, trying to put things into place that might make their lives easier, to alleviate the hunger and the poverty. I don't know if that might be a bit of an idealistic view because there are realities to be faced, and it is the same thing that history learners will often tell me. The problems in Africa are because of complacency and not because, as so many African writers say, these people have learned to accept, they have risen above, their poverty makes them special, their suffering deepens their characters. So there are definitely 2 ways of looking at this problematic situation. When the poor old lady collapses, the narrator instructs a small child to take the starving woman to a hut where she prepares food for her. But before that, she asks for water, so she also gives her water. That afternoon, a young woman comes to the narrator's yard with a pail of water as a token of her family's gratitude for assisting the old woman. They are too poor to offer anything else as a token of gratitude, so they fetch the water and they bring it to her to save her one trip to the tap. The narrator then comments at the end of this short story that the gods and the rest of the world who so easily criticize Africa seem to have forgotten places such as this village. But the ordinary poor people here are kind, compassionate, generous with the little that they have. She says in the last paragraph, tell them, those who judge my country, Africa, by gain and greed, that the gods walk about her barefoot with no ermine and gold-studded cloaks. So to her, the fact that these people look after each other, the fact that they practice Ubuntu make them like the gods who should take care of each other. In the second story, entitled Summer's Sun, the narrator is a young girl, so she is a different narrator than the first two stories. She and her family are waiting next to their lands for the summer rains, which have not yet come, and it's already January. She says that a little bit of rain fell in November, but it's already January and nothing else has fallen in the meantime. And then they are next to their fields, so when the rains come, they can plow and sow before returning to their village. And this touches on the theme of hope, which we're going to discuss later. There was a question in a previous exam paper that asked, what is the significance of the goats in the story? And here you have the answer. The people survive on goat meat because only goats can survive a drought, because they can eat anything and still live. So while they are sitting there quietly next to their fields waiting for the rain to come, the narrator has a lot of time to think and a lot of time to read as she waits with her family for the rain. She tries to learn English from the geography book, which has been given to her by her cousin Lebena, who's also sitting there next to the fields, because he told her that it's important to learn to speak English and to read English. And he also convinces her that African women need to improve themselves because the world is changing and they need to change with it. And then she thinks deeply about many things. At the end, she convinces us that the love that they share for one another is what makes their suffering bearable. As always, we have to determine the relevance of the title after we have read the short story. And this story explores the suffering of the village people. And in the first story, the explanatory essay, the writer philosophizes about poverty in Africa in specific, and not just in the village that she lives in. Village people, we have a community of people, and the story explores the ways in which these poverty-stricken rural people practice a form of Ubuntu or humanity. Remember, they are completely cut off from the world. The only way to travel is by ox cart or wagon, so it is not easy for them to communicate with other people. And how do they practice Ubuntu? They care for and support one another. Remember in the introductory essay where the narrator says that if a baby dies, the people just sit around the mother, not talking, not saying a word, until she has absorbed her own grief and it has become bearable so that she can go on with her life. The narrator or point of view, the introductory essay and the first story, they are narrated in the first person. The narrator appears to be a young adult woman, and she is an educated woman because of the way that she speaks, the diction that she uses, the kind of thoughts that she's able to convey in the introductory essay and at the end of the first story when she talks about the gods who have forgotten Africa, and where she talks about the people who help each other and they are barefoot. This indicates to us that she is educated, unlike the narrator of the second story. And obviously this narrator is concerned about the poverty in Africa. In the second story, the narrator is a young girl, and it's also narrated in the first person because she's also a character in the story, just like in the first story, the old woman. And this young girl tells the reader about herself and her dreams and her hopes for the future. Here we have the plot diagram. Remember, as I've said in all my previous videos about the analyses of the short stories, that is the American way that we spell diagram. We also call this plot diagram the Freytag's pyramid. Now I'm going to link videos in the end screen where you can go look at a complete discussion of how this pyramid works. But for today's purposes, we are only going to look at the setting, and I'll explain why just now. The setting is in rural Botswana, in a village. And where is Botswana? Just for those of us who have never been good in geography, there you see where Botswana is. The structure and the plot development of this story is different from all the others that we are doing. Village People does not have a conventional plot structure like all the other stories because it consists of 3 different stories. So let's move on to characterization immediately. In your Mind the Gap study guide, the authors put the narrator and the young girl of the second story, Summer Sun, into the same category because both of them are helpful, compassionate, generous. In the first story, she offers the old lady water and food. In the second story, the young girl is also compassionate, helpful. The narrator in both of these stories, the young woman and the young girl in Summer Sun, are liberal thinking. They think about their family's problems in the context of a changing Africa. Both of them are clear-sighted. The first narrator, she sees the problem of poverty. She sees how people accept it complacently because she says there is a mindlessness to poverty. If they think about it too closely, they will grow mad. And she talks about the people who have gone mad and the way you can see them wandering the village. And then in the second story, Summer Sun, the young girl sees through the lies of the politician who takes the people up on the mountain to pray for rain. They are also both determined people. The narrator in The Old Woman, she is hopeful that things will change because of Ubuntu. People look after each other. And in the second story, the young girl is also hopeful because she is actually dreaming about a better future. The old woman in the first story is an honest person and she's not ashamed to admit to her hunger, so she's very outspoken. And there was a question in a previous exam paper that said, explain the old woman's character as revealed by these words, display her needs so nakedly. So the memo said that she was honest and outspoken. She is a grateful person. When she goes back, she sends somebody from her family to thank the young woman for helping her. Her relative, the young woman who brings the pail of water to the narrator, she is patient. She just sits there and waits until she's given attention. She is shy. She does not speak until spoken to, and then she's respectful. There was a question, and I have touched on this already. Why do they repay her with a bucket of water? And the answer in the memo was the family is poor. Water is the only thing they have to offer the narrator. They have saved her a trip to get herself some water. The idea of looking after people. How can I repay you? By making your life easier, because I do not have anything monetary or anything material to give you. So I will try to make your life easier, if it's only for one day. The crowd. I include the crowd in this characterization because there was a question about the crowd's reaction to the old lady who publicly and honestly admitted her hunger. So how did they react? Because they are in the same predicament as the old woman, they are also poor, they are also hungry. They feel embarrassed that she would admit publicly that she is hungry. Because you don't do that. You suffer stoically, you suffer quietly. You don't say that you are suffering. The narrator of the introductory essay says that there is a terrible mindlessness about it. But what alternative? And therefore they find it humiliating that she admits to her weakness. Cousin Lebena in the second story, Summer Sun, he is an advanced or modern man. How do we know that? He believes that women need to improve their minds themselves in order to face the challenges in Africa, which is changing rapidly. He is generous because he gives this geography book to the narrator or the young girl so that she can learn about the world outside their country. There was a question about the significance of the geography book, and here is the answer that was given in the memo. It shows us that everything does not center around the village. There is a world or there is life beyond the village. It also shows us the speaker, the young girl's thirst for knowledge, and it broadens her understanding of the drought or the importance of rain, because she actually has such a simple solution. But for the solution to work, there are so many things that must fall into place before it can even be implemented. But she thinks, and because she thinks, she has hope for the future. There was also a question in a previous exam paper where they gave the quote from page 42 that says, she has to think about how she will feed the baby, clothe it and wash it. My sister's baby is lovely though. He laughs a lot for no reason at all. And then the examiner wanted you to show the differences in behavior of the mother and child. Now this is actually a level 2 question because the only thing that is required of you is to rewrite the information already given to you there in the reading passage into your own words. And they said the mother in the second story is concerned about taking care of or feeding, washing and clothing the baby, while the baby is happy and carefree. So this was quite a simple question. You only need to read carefully. You need to take your time. Remember, the art of writing this paper is not to see who finishes first. The art is to see who can write the whole 2 hours and get the best marks. The themes in the short story. Obviously, poverty or struggle. How do you discuss it if you have to discuss the theme of poverty or the struggle these people face? You say life is a struggle for the villagers. They are poverty-stricken or poor. And how do we know this? We see this in the old woman's condition, her dress, and her hunger shows us how extremely poor they are. Babies die of hunger and malnutrition in Africa. There's drought. There's no rain for the crops to grow. Another theme, kindness, compassion, humanity. This one has been asked before. Despite poverty, and now we are in the introductory essay, Africans are friendly, generous, and considerate towards one another. They show kindness and compassion towards other people. Africans are able to understand the pain of a mother who loses a child by being with her without speaking, without requiring anything from her until the pain is bearable. And the narrator in the first story shows kindness and compassion to an old woman who collapses by giving her food and water. And the old woman's family shows humanity, Ubuntu, by sending the young woman with a pail of water to the narrator's family to thank them, as they do not have anything else to give. The theme of hope. The villagers are still hopeful that rain would come. This young girl's family, they wait next to the fields for the rain. If that is not hope, then I don't know. The narrator in the third part of the story is convinced by her cousin Lebena that reading and learning English will bring about change in her life as an African woman, and this might assist her in escaping poverty, which shows us hope. The style of this short story is simple and straightforward with a lot of repetition and imagery. Now, how do we know that the narrator of the first 2 parts and the narrator from the last part are 2 different people? Because the ideas and the language used in the introductory essay and in the first story are more mature. The sentences are more complex. In the second story, the language used and the ideas are simpler. You can clearly see it in the diction. So let's discuss the simile first. As always, they gave you this quote from page 40. She suddenly bent double, retched and coughed emptily. This is the old woman in the first story, and crumbled to the ground like a quiet sigh. They asked you to discuss the appropriateness of this in the context of the story. So the answer in the memo was, the old woman is small and thin, so her fall does not make much of a sound, just like a sigh is not a loud sound. So that's why it's appropriate, because a sigh is a soft sound. She fell softly because she is so tiny, because she's so thin. Her whole body swayed this way and that like a thin stalk of corn in the wind. So how will you explain this simile? You say, just like thin stalks of corn move around in the wind, the old woman's thin body is moving to and fro because she is so weak. She's actually on the verge of falling over. Another simile, her arms were as flat as boards. So just like a board is flat and without shape, the old lady's arms are flat because she is so extremely thin. Next one, all day long we look on it like on death. It's in the second story, Summer Sun. So the relevance, this is what they asked in the exam paper, the relevance of the simile in the context. You first had to identify it. Then you said a simile, and then they asked the relevance in question B. So you would say this figure of speech is relevant to this short story as the heat of the sun scorches or destroys the crops and the people and animals of the villages as there is no rain. The last one, like a quiet second skin. This is the beginning of the introductory essay where she says, poverty has a home in Africa like a quiet second skin. So the narrator wants the reader to know that poverty is always present. It's a permanent feature, like your skin is a permanent feature among the people of Africa. Just like a second skin will be literally close to you, so too is poverty very close to the people of Africa. Now we go to a metaphor. Remember, metaphor is a contracted simile. They equate the two things being compared. They don't use like or as, but they say the one thing is the other one. So in your Mind the Gap study guide, there is only one example given. But if you know how a metaphor works, then obviously if you find a metaphor in a paper, you will be able to answer it. So keeping her face empty. This is in The Old Woman, where the relative of the old woman brings the pail of water as a gift of gratitude. So you will explain it by saying, just like a vessel which is empty and without content, the young woman's face is empty or devoid of any emotion. Obviously, her face cannot be empty because you cannot fill her face. Personification. Remember, personification is when inanimate or non-human objects are given human characteristics. The first one, and if you check in your Mind the Gap study guide, you will see that that one has been explained incorrectly because the quote in your study guide has been typed out incorrectly, so it gives the wrong explanation. Here is the correct explanation. She says in the introductory paragraph, it, and it refers to Africa, may be the only place on earth where it, and in this case it is poverty, is worn with an unconscious dignity. So why is it personification? Africa is given human characteristics because Africa wears poverty as if it is a piece of clothing. Second example, his mind is quick and moves from one thing to another. This is the politician who takes them up the mountain to pray. The politician's mind is given the human quality to move. It is actually his thoughts that change from one idea to another quickly. Each year the sun is more cruel, says the young girl in Summer Sun. How do we explain this personification? You will say the sun, which is an inanimate object, is given the human characteristic of cruelty because it is so extremely hot. The many birds in the bush will welcome it. Same narrator will welcome the sun tomorrow morning. So the birds, non-human creatures, will welcome the new day or the sun, just like people will welcome something. In other words, the birds are given the characteristic of hospitality. And who picked up that quick change there? Also, in Summer Sun, the young narrator says the stars spread across the sky and bend down at the horizon. So the stars, inanimate objects, are given the human abilities of spreading out and of bending down. And last example, the first sentence of Village People, poverty has a home in Africa. Poverty is being personified and given the ability to own a home, and its home is in Africa, which shows us that it feels most comfortable there. The tone of this short story. Remember, tone is the general character or attitude of a piece of writing, of a character at a certain point or moment in a story, and of the writer or poet towards his subject matter. There is a tone of despair, without a doubt. How do we know this? Because the opening sentence of this short story says, poverty has a home in Africa like a quiet second skin. So it seems as if hope is completely lost. The people are quite helpless against the cruelty of nature and the ongoing drought which results in starvation and death. A tone of hopelessness. There's a feeling of hopelessness as the villagers wait in vain for the drought to end. Their lives are difficult and there are few opportunities for improving their lives. Remember, they live in deep rural Botswana, and the only way of communicating with other villagers is through ox cart or sledge. And poverty also creates fear and anxiety. There was a question about this in a previous exam paper, so we're going to discuss this just now. There's also an optimistic, hopeful tone with the young narrator of the second story. The narrator feels hopeful that the rains will come and that education will emancipate her. But she also says in this same story, Summer Sun, how can we live like this? And this was given as a question in an exam paper, and they said, what is the tone in this sentence? And the answer was despair, despondency, hopelessness, negativity, and you had to motivate it, and you would have said, because there's no water. The area is very dry and all the villagers struggle to survive. They are waiting for the rains to come to plant. If the rains do not come, they can't plant. And then next summer, next winter, there will be no food. And she is tired of their daily struggle to survive. Go read that story very carefully and you will see it. The mood is the state of mind or feeling that is evident in a piece of writing, either of a character or of the reader. Mood and tone are quite closely intertwined because the tone determines how you feel when you read the story. So the mood is serious, gloomy, somber, depressing. There's no sign of rain. The people starve, babies die, they cannot sow their seeds, so there will be no harvest the next year. The people are worried about how they will survive. She says, the young girl in Summer Sun, I feel great pity for my family and other families. I wonder why we sit here like this. Each day the sun is hot in the blue sky. Each day the water pool of November rain gets smaller. So she seems to be really sad and worried. Now let me give you a quick tip on how to study easier. You get different learning styles. You either get an auditory learning style or you get a kinesthetic learning style where you have to move. If you have an auditory learning style, then you have to hear while you learn. Now, the more of your senses you involve in the learning process, the more effective learning will be. So if you read the story and you write the answers and you read it aloud to yourself so that you can hear it again, then you involve more senses. If you are an auditory learner, you have to say your work to yourself aloud. If you are a kinesthetic learner, you have to move. So what do you do then? You go for a run, you go for a walk, you go for a ride on your bicycle, you go and skip outside. But while you do that, you listen to this video. Because remember now, most of the video comes from previous exam papers or from your Mind the Gap study guide, because that is what is expected of you in the exams. The department follows the Mind the Gap study guides very closely in the exams. So if you want your learning to be most effective, you involve most of your senses in your learning process. And I know, that means you cannot just lie on your bed and try and learn through osmosis. No, you actually have to put in a bit of work, which makes it a little bit more difficult. But we want to be effective. We want good marks. So this is crunch time. You don't have a lot of time left. You can do this for the next few months, and then you are done with it. This was not a level 5 question, but I put it in here because it is not explained anywhere in your Mind the Gap study guide, but this shows you how carefully you must learn, how carefully you must read. They ask, using your own words, explain the meaning of the following lines, and this is from Summer Sun. Quiet talk of grandfather and cousin Lebena seemed to make heaven and earth come together. What does this mean? And this is what the memo wanted of you. The relaxed atmosphere, the quiet talk at night creates harmony, and the heaven, which is the cruel sun, does not appear to be the earth's enemy. In a level 4 and 5 question, they want your view. They want to know, what do you think? But your response must be based firmly on the short story. So you must know your short story. Then you answer yes or no. And as I've said in all the previous videos, most of us cannot write 3 things for 3 marks. So if you can say yes, reasons, but on the other hand, no reasons, the chances of getting 3 out of 3 or 4 out of 4 are so much higher. So the first question, the young girl in this extract, and they gave an extract from the second story, Summer Sun, can be admired. Discuss your view. If you said yes, she can be admired, you could have used the following arguments. The young girl aspires to continue with her education but cannot further her studies. She tries to empower herself by learning English and reading geography books. She realizes that having a baby out of wedlock, like her sister, will worsen the family's suffering. Or you could have said no, she cannot be admired. The young girl does not have to accept the situation. She's still young and can make a living outside the village, and she can further her studies and support her family. Personally, I think that no response is a bit idealistic, just somewhat utopian, considering the situation that they live in, but there you have it, a no response is possible. A second example, in this story, the narrator states that poverty-stricken people are not outgoing and open to change. Discuss your view. The extract they gave you for this question was from The Old Woman, but the question says, in this story, so it's from the whole village people, not just the old woman. So if you think that this statement is true, you might have used the following points to argue your case. Poverty leads to fear and anxiety because where's tonight's meal going to come from? Which makes poor people not be receptive to outside help. The village people find it humiliating that the old woman talks of her hunger like that. They find it difficult to leave the situation that they are familiar with. That is why I thought the previous questions no answer was a bit idealistic, and look for greener pastures. They adapt to harsh conditions. They don't have any choice. They must, and they lack skills. Who would have taught them any skills if they are only trying to survive every day? If you were of the opinion that you do not agree with the statement, you would have said the young narrator is improving herself by learning English from a geography book, so she is open to change. Her cousin tells her that there's no end to the knowledge to be gained, and she has not accepted her condition of poverty. She changed the method of thinking. She cannot have a baby because she knows that she will not be able to feed it. And she has hope for the future and new good days. And there you have it. The story is a little bit more complex than it appears because it is so short, but beautiful story, truly beautiful story, which gives you insight into the minds of people. And that is what good literature does. Good luck.